Hello and welcome to another video tutorial from Blender HD. My name is Jonathan Lampel, and today I'm going to be going over the last part in my tutorial series, how to make a scene realistic inside of Blender. So in this last part, we're going to be going over a few cleanup kind of things, and going over compositing and rendering. And you might be surprised, but this last stage is just as crucial as the ones previous. We went over lighting, which is hugely important. We went over materials and texturing and details, and each of those things are incredibly important. But this last step of just cleaning up and doing some, basic compositing is really going to add to our image and really bring it to make it a nice final product. So where we left off was, if you had just rendered it out, it would look something like this. And while this looks better than it did initially at the start, it does have better lighting and has more details, it still looks wrong. And to be honest, as I went through this, I just kind of did it as I went, and so what happens is, even if you do a little bit of planning, there are things that just don't end up the way you think they're going to be. And so this is a really good thing to go over now, because when you're working on a project and you think, okay, I did all my texturing, I did all my modeling, it's done, don't ever think of it as completely done, because if we take a look at this now, there are some things in each area that really stand out as wrong, or as, don't look that good. I shouldn't say wrong, but things that just don't look that great. And so I'm going to point them out for you now, so we can go ahead and fix those things. First of all, with lighting, you see that there are these really hard edges here on the barrels, and there's one down there, and it just really looks very bad, and it's easy to fix, but it's something that I overlooked, and we definitely need to fix that. Second of all, the scene is way too dark. We're going to be fixing this in compositing though, so I'll be going over that a little bit later. A couple other things, this grass over here and over there, it looks way too big. Remember, I was talking about scale and emphasizing it a whole bunch, and then I went and made it the wrong scale. It looks like it should be a lot smaller, and it really throws off the scene as a whole. I don't really like this. I think those leaves should be a little smaller over there. And just a couple other tweaks that we'll look at along the way, such as the bump on here and the texture on the barrels we're going to touch over, and then do a final rendering and compositing. And hopefully it won't take as long as the last couple times, but just this last step of going through and refining things will really help us have a nice polished image. So let's go ahead and get started. First of all, let's go and correct the lighting. So remember, there are those really sharp edges there. So all I need to do here is something really simple. I don't know what happened there. Is I'm just going to press Shift B and select that, and then go to Render View so I can keep an eye on what's working and what's not. And since this light it needs to be very small. That's the issue here, is that, by increasing the size, we could easily get that to be a softer shadow. However, we wouldn't have these sharp lines here, which really bring out the image. So the tricky part is to have both at the same time. And in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to rotate this a little bit more this way, such that the shadow is naturally hidden a little bit more behind the barrel. So as you can see, it's starting to look a little bit better. You still get a little bit of a sharp line, but we don't want to make it too flat as well. And down here you can see that there's that line there. And so I'm going to rotate it a little bit up, make it not quite so steep and angled, and that'll just help push that shadow back a little bit farther underneath. Okay, so we have kind of hidden that problem. I wouldn't say it would be a fix, but we just kind of tweaked the lighting a little bit, and now it looks a lot better. But now if we look at this, our shadows kind of moved since we shifted the shadows of these over here, and I kind of wanted them to start a little bit more to the left. So all I need to do is just take this and drag it over to the left, make it start wherever I want. And I think it was right about there that it looked good, so I'm going to keep it like that. Now we could change the brightness of that light, but I think I'm going to do that in compositing because I like the balance of the environment light to the real light. Though I guess we could go ahead and give it a shot. If I increase that to 2 and the lamp to 2, that'll brighten things up a little bit more. But again, we'll go ahead and tweak that in the compositing. Next, what I'm going to do is I'm going to decrease the size of those grass particles because those are really bugging me. Since they are so big, it's making the rest of the scene look small, and we want the barrels to look, fairly large. So just select the ground, go into the particle settings, find grass, and tweak the normal value here. So maybe 0.25. Put 1, play around with it a little bit. But I think that looks a lot better. So we do have less grass, and if you wanted to increase this to, say, 60 to compensate, and maybe looks like it has a little bit too much random roughness. Or uniform roughness, maybe. Okay, well, anyway, that looks better, and it just makes the rest of the scene look bigger, and the grass is now not dominating the scene. It's just a nice extra detail to help it make it more realistic. So that's very good. Now I will go and change the bump texture on the ground. One of the users commented, I forgot exactly who. Sorry about that. But he said that if you blur the texture a little bit inside of GIMP, it'll really make a nicer bump, because sharp edges do not make nice bumps apparently. And so what I did is I just took this mask that I had made, blurred it just a little bit in GIMP, and now I'm going to load it into here. So it doesn't make a massive difference because, we could have had a higher resolution texture, would probably have looked nicer. However, that's what it looks like now, and I can go ahead and open the new blurred one, and it does help pop the stones out of the ground a little bit more. So that's something that I didn't know, that sharp edges don't make good bumps. So keep that in mind, because I think that's a very useful thing to know. Okay, a few more tweaks we can look at. I think that it's looking fairly good. I think that I wanted to decrease the size of those leaves there, so I can just select that, go into the particle settings, and maybe change that to 0.2. 0.15 actually I think looks pretty good. I change that to 3000, and there we go. Since I decreased the size of those, I'll do that for these a little bit, but I do like those leaves. They look fairly good. And then compensate for the size by adding a few more. Okay, so that was simple enough. Is there anything else that I'm missing? Oh, one thing that also kind of bothered me. Which, should we go ahead and fix this? Yeah, we probably should. So, I apparently misunderstood that this was a puddle here, and I think it was originally supposed to be a pile of trash or something, but that's not what it, I feel like a puddle would be much better in this situation, but puddles are not lumpy. I I don't know how I overlooked that, but you know, it's definitely kind of one of those silly little things that's easy to slip up, or I was just being dumb, one of the two. But yeah, puddles are not lumpy. Puddles are completely flat, and the ground itself is lumpy. So to fix that, let's just select all of this here, press SZ0, and that's going to scale it to make it completely flat on the Z-axis. And now I'm going to bring it up to be just underneath the ground. Right about there. Maybe that's too close. Yeah, it's too close because you don't want them overlapping at all. Okay, there we go. And now if I want to make a puddle, I can select this ground here, turn on proportional editing, and gently drag down and make a puddle that way. And that's going to turn out to be a lot better than a lumpy puddle, and it's going to look much more realistic. And you also have pretty good control of exactly where you want it, and if you wanted a higher resolution, you could subdivide it a little bit more if you wanted, but for now I think this will be fine. Maybe use the random fall excuse me, use the random fall off and grab vertices and shift them just ever so slightly. Oh, it doesn't make sense if those are sitting on the puddle now, does it? Ooh, didn't think of that. Okay, well, okay, well they'll still actually be sitting in the water, and you'll still be able to see them since it's partly transparent anyway. So either way, I guess. Yeah. So this is a much better way to make a puddle, and my point is made. Okay, so there we go. Let's render that just to see how it's looking. Okay, so that looks fine. I think I might want to pull maybe these down a little bit more so that the barrel can be reflecting off of the water, because I liked it like that. That looks pretty cool. Okay, so now we have our puddle. Maybe I'll make it a little bit more even. Okay. And also one other thing that fixed is that now the reflection won't bend. That's one thing that was throwing me off, is that, reflections on a flat surface don't do that, so that'll help us in the long run. Alright, so we're almost done with the details, or the fixing up of things. Wow, I say way too much. I need to stop doing that. Okay. Whew, I almost said it again. So, inside these barrels, we have this green light, and right now, you can hardly see it. It's very, very faint, and it should be one of the dominating parts of the scene, because it's, crucial to the focus of the scene. And so, we're going to brighten those up now, because it looks silly to have these, well, it doesn't look silly, but it would just look better, and I think it looks very, very cool when it's in the shadow and having the green come out, and it looks very nice. So I'm going to select that, and I'm going to turn it up to something really high, like 300. And now we have that light actually affecting the environment and giving a green tint around there, and it looks much nicer. And I turned the size to 1 so it's not giving any harsh shadows or anything. It just looks like a nice unearthly glow. And I'll do the same thing for this one. Maybe 300 is a bit much, you can decide, but when I was playing with it earlier, 300 seemed to work great, so whichever you want. Alright, cool. Lastly, the very last thing, hopefully, is this bump texture on here. Somebody also noticed in the comments, they said, why, if you're making a reflective barrel, would you not plug the bump into the glossy shader so you could actually see the reflections in those little cracks? And another thing where I was just being dumb and didn't do that. But if you do that, then you'll go ahead and see these reflections start to appear in there, and it's going to look a whole lot better because those cracks are going to be outlined, and it'll just look a lot more realistic. But I think maybe the bump is a bit overdone. So I'm going to set this to negative 0.05. Okay, so that is fine for now. I think maybe the glossy might need to be a little bit less, should be a little bit more blurred, so I'm going to set that to 0.15, and we'll call it good for today. So no, that's not the end of the tutorial, because that's just fixing up all my previous mistakes. But as you work on a project by yourself, and you go through and you think that you're done, and then you suddenly look at it and you're like, wow, I can't believe I made those mistakes, and that definitely happens to me every time. And so I guess that's a good little lesson, is don't really think you're done until you're done. I don't know what else to say. Alright, so now we're going to go on to compositing. For this part, I'm just going to pause the recording while it's rendering so you don't have to sit there and wait, because that would be very boring. I'm just going to use a sampling of 500 so it's nice and smooth, and 720p GPU rendering so it's faster. Pretty basic stuff, so I'll see you in a second. Okay, so now we have our finally rendered scene. If you compare it to the picture here that we had at first, it does look much better. Of course, there are still a few things that, you know, we could go ahead and change. Maybe add some dirt to the posters, make it so the puddle actually lines up with the rocks. But the thing with a project like this, to really make it realistic, you have to spend the time and do all the little things. You might think, you know, even this is a fairly simple scene, right? It should not be that complicated. But when you get into it, there's always these little things that you have to tweak, and we could go on for quite a while doing it until it's, you know, portfolio ready or whatever. So I mean, if you really wanted to make this a portfolio piece, first of all, you shouldn't, because it came from somebody online that's not you. You should model it yourself. But if you did, then I would definitely suggest spending hours more, not like too many hours, but, you know, a good solid, say, 5 hours, even for this simple scene, and you could improve it vastly more than I have already. So what I'm trying to say is, don't think that this is, you know, completely done perfection, because frankly it's not. But my point was not to, you know, get a perfect image. My point is to show you the process of creating an image, of, you know, first breaking it down piece by piece and making sure that all of the aspects are good. So we have the lighting is good, the details are good, the texturing is good, and I kind of skimmed over it. But at the end, you still need to go back and evaluate at each step how things are going. So while you're lighting, you have to evaluate how your modeling was And when you're, texturing, you have to, maybe tweak your lighting. And as you're going through the process of creating your image, um, just all these continual tweaks and details that you put in there really help sell the image. So I'm going to say that this is definitely not perfect, but it is the result of this tutorial, and I hope that you did learn something from just going through with me. So with that, I'm going to go into compositing, the very last part of the tutorial. All you have to do is check Use Nodes and Backdrop, and then I press Shift Space to maximize this window so I don't have to be distracted by anything else. And I can press Control Shift, left click, and we have our background there. So Control Shift just automatically connects your node to whatever node you click on. Alright, so first of all, with this scene, or pretty much with any scene, I go and change the RGB curves. So I'm going to go and do that, color RGB curves. And I play around with S curves. And what that does is just helps lighten up the lighter spots and darken the darker spots. If you don't know how this works, basically what an S curve, or a curve on an RGB scale is this corner represents, or this top part represents the higher values, and this part represents the lower values. And then, moving this way means lighter, and this way means darker. Or, sorry, this way means, that way means darker, that way means lighter. But anyway, basically with a little S curve, we're taking the lighter values and making them a little bit lighter, and we're taking the darker values and making them a little bit darker. However, since the overall scene is a little bit flat, we can move this down and just kind of tweak your curve until you have, kind of the color range that you want. If you want, you can tweak the white level and black value. That means any color over this is going to be white, so this, definitely brightens your image. If you wanted some overexposed image, you could do that, certainly. I think I'm going to have it right there. That's looking good. And the black level does exactly the opposite. The higher you set it, the more black your image is going to be. And while that looks like a cool, grungy, post-apocalyptic something or other, that's not really what we're going for. I'm just going to bring this up just a tad. Okay, so what that has done is really brought out our image, made it more, more pleasing. That looks very, very flat and boring, while this looks more dynamic. And it just looks a little bit better, but I think there might be a little bit too much contrast. And, the colors aren't exactly the way I'd want, so I can go in and use color and let's see, what do I want to do? Let's do color balance. So lift, gamma, gain, these three here are not quite the same as the shadows, midtones, and highlights, which actually I want to go and do the shadows, midtones, and highlights because I think I like that better. So yeah, so add a color correction node, and now I can go in and correct these colors. So you can see here that there is a master, a highlight, midtone, and a shadow, and this is a really powerful node, just kind of an all-in-one sort of thing to help you with your colors. And this row here tweaks the entire image. So if you want to lower the saturation of the entire image, you can do that, and it affects everything. Same with, contrast, gamma, done to just the entire image. However, if you wanted to tweak just the saturation of the highlights, you can see that that's happening up there in those highlights. It'll tweak only the very, very bright areas, whereas midtone will tweak the average things, and the shadows will tweak the darker parts. So I think that this is a very, very nice thing to use, and you can tweak where the midtones and the shadows start and end. So that's Very, very cool. Right now what I think I want to do is I want to take the highlights and, let's see, play around with those a little bit. So maybe add just a little bit of gamma. Not too much gain. I don't like how that's looking. Over everything, I want to take down the saturation just a little bit because it's a little bit too saturated. So maybe 0.95, maybe even 0.9. I think that looks better. In the shadows especially, I want to take down the saturation. But you can see that that's affecting kind of everything. But if I change where the midtones start, if I bring that up, oh, nope, other way around, if I bring this down perhaps, it's doing something a little bit different than I thought. Because I would assume that the midtones end would change where the shadows also end. Oh, there we go. I've changed the midtone start. That's what it was. Okay. So the shadows are only the very, very black areas. And changing the saturation of the shadows down really helps in the realism, because if you don't know what happens when you're looking at a shadow or in a dark room, you lose the color part of your vision because you're looking at it and it's... I can't really explain to you why it happens, but next time you go into a dark room with and your eyes kind of adjust, try to pick out individual colors and you'll find that you can't. I actually didn't know that for a while, so don't, yeah, that's just what happens, and it's kind of awkward that I didn't know that. But anyway, so moving on, I think the saturation is just a little bit too much, so maybe 0.8, that's looking a little bit better. And I think that looks good. So if you take a look at where we started and where we are now, that looks pretty good. One thing that I do like is I like vignettes, so let's go ahead and do that. Add a vignette. So what we can do is, I believe it's a matte ellipse mask. There we go. And we can just plug that in, make sure that this size is correct. Somewhere around there. There we go. Don't even plug that in. That was the problem. Okay, so we have that just kind of hanging there. We want to blur the edges, so we go to Filter and Blur. I like to use relative, so in case you change the size of the image. And there we go. We have our nice little vignette, and then we can use the color mix and take the two and multiply them. So now we have a vignette around the edges, and you can control how how dark it is, whatever. You can also have a value, this value input here, which is very, very cool. If you set that to 2, it's going to brighten the inside of the vignette, which or darken it, which is kind of handy sometimes. So in case you wanted to know that, I think I'm going to blur that just a little bit more. And we are almost done. What I generally do at this point is plug this in here, and I like to do kind of layers of color correction, not all at once. Sometimes switching between programs, just kind of like a little extra help, I suppose. I don't really know how to explain it. You could certainly do this all inside of Blender, but I think I'm going to use GIMP for the second part of this. So going to go to our image here. I feel like it should have the compositing. Oh well, we could just go to the viewer node. There we go, F3, save as desktop, barrels. Okay, now I'm going to open GIMP. Then open that image. So, of course you could use Photoshop, but for the time being, I'm using GIMP just because. That's about it. Okay, barrels, open that up. And I've found that sometimes images look different inside of Blender than out. Generally, it has to do with brightness a little bit. It's not a huge difference here. I think in older versions of Blender, I found some kind of discrepancies. It just looked different than what I thought it would. But yeah, that's just the way it is, I suppose. But now you can go in and with the hue saturation option here, I kind of like this one. You can individually tweak colors based on the hue saturation and lightness of the individual color. So I don't know if you can do this in Blender. I'm not sure. So say I'm going to take the red and I wanted to make that a little bit more saturated, with the barrels, then I could do that if I wanted to, which I think I will take that up a little bit. Maybe I want to take up the green a little bit more and kind of emphasize that in those areas. And maybe I wanted to take down the blues a little bit, but I don't think we have too many of those. Maybe cyan. Play with that. But anyway, I just wanted to bring out those two areas because, I like that green glow, definitely not that much. And, that red really bringing that out. I think that's very good. And then I also use the RGB curves here, which I feel like they act a little bit different. Maybe they don't. Maybe that's just me. But I feel like I have better control over what I'm doing. And if you go to the blue channel, generally I like to do this sometimes to represent sunlight, where if you take the blue down this way, it's going to add a little bit of yellow, because that's the opposite of blue. And if you take it this way, it's going to add blue to your image. However, if you make a little S-curve where the lighter parts of the image are a little bit more yellow, and the darker parts are a little bit more blue, I think that it gives it a nice overall feel. Go back to the value, just kind of tweak that a little bit. Make it a little bit brighter. And there we go. I think I'll end here. I think that's good enough, so we can go to File, Export. And this part always takes forever. Barrels 2. Okay, so we didn't do a whole lot in GIMP, but I think that it did add a little bit to it. Maybe we can... Nope, you're not supposed to see that. That's awkward. Okay. Alright, so... Okay, we had the image that we started with. Did a little bit of editing in Blender. Came up with this, which is looking a whole lot nicer. Then tweaked it a little bit in GIMP. And just kind of brought the colors out and made it look a little bit better. So... this is going to be the end of the series. I hope you learned a lot. I hope that you might have a better understanding of the process of going through and creating an image, not just starting like, oh hey, let's make an image, because it might be easy to model, it might be easy to light, but there are things along the way that you have to be aware of, and you have to constantly be improving it, and you have to constantly be looking at it. And even now I'm looking at this and being like, well, it might have too much contrast, or whatever. Really it comes down to the very minute details, and I'm going to encourage you to practice with something and just make it look as good as you can, even if it's a very simple image like this where there's not too much going on, but just make it look as good as you can. And I really need to get working on some more portfolio pieces because I haven't made anything for a while. So hopefully I'll be having more work come out in the future if I'm not working on any other jobs. But anyway, that's a total side note. I hope you enjoyed the tutorial. I hope you learned something from it. I hope that, if you have any questions, feel free to post them in the comments below. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed it. Next time, this is kind of a thing for the next tutorial, is I'm going to be making a tutorial on explosions. And this is something that people have requested quite a few times, but I want to see if you have any specific questions regarding them, because I know it's something that's pretty exciting, especially in VFX, and a few improvements in Blender, like the very, very, very latest version, have made it possible to do some very nice effect that just frankly wasn't possible before. So if you have any specific questions regarding those, also post those in the comments below, and I will get to them in the next tutorial, because I know that sometimes there are a few tricky things with that. So I hope to see you next time. Thank you for watching, and have a great day.